Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and I have another great lesson today talking about macromolecules. Specifically, we're looking at protein. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it. So proteins, something I need us to remember is the atoms that make up proteins, okay? It's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sometimes sulfur, okay? But what we really want to focus on, if y'all could remember the word CHON for me, okay? CHON. What atoms make up proteins? CHON. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Sometimes there's a sulfur in there, okay? Let's remember that the monomer for proteins are amino acids. There are 20 amino acids. Amino acids come together to form proteins, okay? Out of those 20 amino acids, 12 of them can be made in the body. We would call those non-essential amino acids. You don't have to get them out of your diet. And then out of those 28 are essential amino acids, which means the only place you get them is from your diet. So you have to eat them in order to have them, okay? What do proteins do for us? Well, sometimes they provide energy, but what we really want to focus on is the structure that they provide. When you look in the mirror, you're mostly seeing proteins. That's what your body is really made up of, okay? They also help repair body tissues. Your muscles and bones are all made out of proteins, and when you're exercising and working out, you're really increasing those muscles by letting them be made more out of the proteins that you have in your diet. Okay, proteins, sometimes you'll hear a couple of different words to describe them. Some examples of proteins are hormones, okay, so insulin. If you know anything about people with diabetes, their body does not make enough of this protein called insulin, and that affects their blood sugar. It either gets too high or too low, and so they have to take artificial insulin to kind of make up for that. Another example of proteins are enzymes. Enzymes are biological catalysts, which means they make chemical equations happen a lot faster. And I have a lab that we're going to do later on in this unit looking at a specific type of enzyme in your body. Okay? Another example of proteins are neurotransmitters. This is basically how nervous tissue or nerves, like the stuff that makes up your brain, kind of communicates to each other. They transmit signals using these proteins, okay? What are foods that are high in proteins? Well, examples of that would be meat, eggs, poultry, so that's chicken, milk and milk products, as well as nuts, dried beans, peas, and lentils. So when people think of proteins, they usually think of meats, but there are a couple of examples that aren't meats. Like I mentioned earlier, the nuts and the beans, peas, and lentils are all high in proteins, but aren't necessarily meat. Okay? Let's take another look at proteins and amino acids. So something that is very important about proteins is that they are the most complex of the macromolecules. They have a wide range of jobs, and we're going to try to mention some of those today. Like I mentioned earlier, some of the really important functions of proteins, they are enzymes, they also make up blood cells and muscle tissue, and they're often associated with meat products. So when you're trying to get more proteins in your diet, if you're trying to have a high protein diet, you want to eat a lot of meats, but there are some other examples too if you're trying to avoid those. So the monomers of proteins are amino acids, and again there's 20 different amino acids, but they can come together in any combination and make millions of proteins inside of your body. Okay? So I wanted to introduce y'all to this dog. If you take a look at this dog here, this is Wendy, and she's a bully whippet. So she's kind of a mixture of a bulldog and a whippet. Not all bully whippets look like this. Wendy has a very rare genetic disorder called hypertrophy, which means she's double muscled. That's what people say sometimes. Her body just naturally makes way more muscles than most other dogs of this breed would. And so you can see here just how muscular she really looks. She's almost got twice as many muscles as other dogs of this same breed. And so that's just to drive home the point that your muscles, the majority of your body, the structure of your body is mostly proteins. If you have this genetic disorder, that muscular hypertrophy, you would have way more muscles than somebody else who doesn't have that disorder, okay? Proteins are made of amino acids, and remember those amino acids come together and they're bound by a special type of bond called a peptide bond. And so a polymer of protein, sometimes people will call it a polypeptide chain. Poly, remember, means many. Peptide is the type of bond between amino acids. So if you get a lot of amino acids together, there would also be a lot of peptide bonds. So another name for a protein is a polypeptide. A lot of times people use those two words, polypeptide and protein, interchangeably. They don't actually mean the same thing. A polypeptide is a protein before it is totally done being made. And we're going to look at that in a little bit of detail here. Depending on how those amino acids come together, the chain of amino acids, the polypeptide, can be folded in a unique way. The shape of an enzyme or a protein is very, very important to its function. And so depending on what amino acids there are, it's going to fold in a different way. That's going to give it a different shape, and the different shape gives them their different functions, okay? So just wanted to throw a picture up here. Here are foods that are very, very high in proteins. You can see a lot of meat products here. We've got chicken and beef and pork. There are some other examples though. You can see beans and eggs up there. There's almonds and some chickpeas it looks like. So all of these are foods that are very, very high in proteins. And you really want to have a lot of protein in your diet. Whether you're trying to build muscle or just maintain your weight, the daily recommended value for how much protein you're supposed to have is 1 gram per body weight. So if you weigh 100 pounds, you're supposed to have 100 grams of protein in your diet. That's a lot. Most of those protein shakes will have like 20 to 25 grams of protein. So depending on your weight, that really kind of determines how much protein you're supposed to have. If you're trying to gain muscle, it's even more. You probably want to go with 1.5 times your body weight. So if you're trying to bulk up, if you're trying to put on muscle, maybe you're a football player and trying to get as strong as you can. If you weigh 100 pounds, you're supposed to have 150 grams of protein in a day if you're trying to put on muscle. So that's just kind of a rule of thumb, depending on if you're trying to maintain weight, 1 gram per pound of body weight, or if you're trying to bulk up, 1.5 grams of protein per body weight. Great. So I wanted to get into a little bit more detail on the difference in between a polypeptide and a protein. And what this really comes down to is the folding of that polypeptide. So our first structure here, what we're looking at under that primary structure, this is a polypeptide chain. Now what I want us to know, each of these individual little red circles in that picture is an amino acid. So you can see there's a lot of amino acids there. Amino acids are the monomers of proteins. So once you get a lot of amino acids there, each amino acid, each little red circle is bound to the amino acid next to it by a peptide bond. Okay, that's why this is called a polypeptide. There's a lot of peptide bonds in this structure, okay? But what happens is, depending on which amino acids are in this polypeptide chain, the secondary structure is going to have a particular shape to it. So there's two examples in this secondary structure. You can either have a pleated sheet, which is that blue line on the left, or you can have an alpha helix, which is that kind of spiral shape on the right. So depending on what amino acids there are, the hydrogen bonding between those amino acids is going to give it a particular shape. Okay, but we're not done here. Depending on which secondary structures you have, that's going to determine further folding and the shape of these proteins further down the line. Okay, so we've got our tertiary structure next there on the left. So this is the interaction of bonds between the alpha helices and the beta sheets. So in the secondary structure, depending on what you had there, how many pleated sheets versus how many of those spirals that you have, it's going to continue to fold in a particular shape. Okay? And then lastly, the last folding of this polypeptide chain is known as the quaternary structure. Okay? An example of this is hemoglobin, which is the thing that moves oxygen around your bloodstream. So I wanted to kind of talk about the difference here in between a protein and a polypeptide chain. What we're looking at here in the quaternary structure, that is a full protein. It's done all of the folding and it has the particular shape that it needs in order to do its job. Up until this point, the first, second, and third steps, those aren't proteins. We would call those polypeptide chains. So a polypeptide is a protein before it has done all the folding. Once it's done folding and it has the shape that it needs, now it's a protein. So a polypeptide chain is like a protein that's not fully formed yet. Okay, let's just take another look at this folding process. So on the left, we have that primary structure. You can see that each little circle there has a short abbreviation. Those different abbreviations are the different amino acids. Remember, there's 20 amino acids that come together to make proteins. So on the left, this is a polypeptide chain. We have a lot of amino acids. Each amino acid is held in place by a peptide bond. There's many peptide bonds, so this would be called a polypeptide. Okay? Depending on how those amino acids are interacting with each other, our secondary structure, again, you could get this alpha helix, which is like a spiral, or you could get those pleated sheets, which looks like it's a piece of paper that has a lot of folds in it. Okay? So also notice that it's primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. That's basically the first structure, the second structure, the third structure, and the fourth structure. Okay? So now depending on how many pleated sheets versus alpha helices you have, that's going to give you your tertiary structure. So now those bonds are kind of interacting more, the protein is continuing to fold, and we're trying to get to a particular shape so that the protein can do its job. Lastly, the quaternary structure. This could be one or more polypeptide chains that have all been folded, and now this is a full protein. This is probably hemoglobin, and the particular shape, all the folding that it had, is very important because now the shape is correct and it's able to do the job that it needs to. So this quaternary structure, this hemoglobin that we're looking at on the right, the shape of this protein makes it very good at carrying oxygen. Okay? Great, so I just kind of wanted to hit some of the high points real quick before we wrap up for the day. So this is just kind of an overview of proteins. What are some of the functions and examples of proteins? One thing that's really important, our whole next lesson is on enzymes. What is an enzyme? An enzyme is a protein that speeds up reactions. You can kind of see a picture of it there in the top right corner. You see how the enzyme is that kind of purple blob, and then it's got these two little shapes that are coming into the enzyme. That enzyme's kind of breaking it apart. So that's an example of it speeding up a chemical reaction. It's able to take substrates and break it into these different products. Okay? What are some other functions and examples of proteins? Proteins make up some of our hormones, not all of them. Some hormones are made up of lipids, but some are made up of protein. An example of this is like insulin, which helps you break down that sugar in your blood and maintain your blood sugar. Your proteins make up your bones and your muscles, so your body is mostly made up of proteins. Okay? Later on, way farther down in this class, we'll talk about how proteins help transport things in and out of the cell. Okay? There are proteins inside of the cell membrane, and they kind of work like doorways or gateways, and it lets certain molecules in and out of the cell. Lastly, your proteins are a type of antibody. Antibodies help you fight off disease and help keep you from getting sick. Okay? All right, y'all, so before we totally wrap up for the day, I've got a couple of review questions I wanted us to work on, okay? So teacher, go ahead, pass out that worksheet for everybody. This is kind of what it looks like, okay? I think there's just 10 questions on here. Why don't y'all go ahead, pass that out, take 5 or 10 minutes, let the students work together with a partner maybe. When y'all are ready for the answers, y'all can come back, unpause the video, and I'll go over it with y'all, okay? So go ahead, pause the video, take a couple minutes to work on that, and then when y'all are ready, you can come back to me, and I'm going to go over this worksheet with y'all. All right, so let's see what everybody came up with. Just 10 quick questions on some stuff we talked about today. So let's look at this. Number 1, what elements or atoms are proteins made of? Well, there was kind of a word that I wanted y'all to remember. Does anyone remember what that word was? Yeah, it was CHON, right? C-H-O-N. And these stand for carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And then sometimes sometimes S, which is sulfur, okay? So these are the elements that make up proteins. All right, 2, what type of food can you find proteins in? What's the best example of this? Most people are going to go right away to meats. So pork, poultry, beef, all of those are going to be high in proteins. But there's a couple of other examples too. You might want to go with eggs, okay? Milk has a lot of protein in it, okay? But also things like nuts and beans, okay? And even like a legume. A peanut is a legume. I know it has the word nut in it, but it's actually a different type of food called a legume. So these are some examples that are high in proteins. All right, the next one, number 3. What are the building blocks or monomers of protein? So what are proteins made up of? Okay, proteins are made up of amino acids. Amino acids. There's 20 different types of amino acids, all right? So let's look at the next one. Number 4 here says, how many different building blocks are there in total? I just kind of gave that answer away, sorry about that. There are 20 different types of amino acids. That might make you think that there's not that many different types of proteins, but those 20 amino acids can come together in so many different ways that you actually have a ton of proteins in your body. I think that's actually the next question. I keep getting ahead of myself here. So number 5 says, how many different types of proteins can be found in the human body? Well, like I was saying earlier, we see 20 building blocks. That might make you think that the number is not very high, but scientists actually think the number is in the millions or possibly even in the billions of different types of proteins in your body, okay? Proteins have so many different jobs, we're not even done finding all of them. All right, so this is the top half of the page. I'm going to do 6 real quick, and then we'll do the bottom half here in just a second. So 6, what type of bonds connect these building blocks? So remember, amino acids come together to make proteins. What are the name of the bonds in between each different amino acid? These are called peptide bonds. So peptide, okay? A peptide bond is in between 2 amino acids, and it helps hold the amino acids together. Okay, so take a second, make sure you got all of those, pause the video if you need to, add or change anything you need to, and when you're ready, I'll erase it. Y'all can come back and unpause the video, and I'll do the bottom half real quick. All right. All right, so let's do this bottom half of the page. Y'all are doing great. Y'all are very, very smart. Let's knock this out, and then y'all can keep practicing some of this stuff later on. So 7 says, what is a chain of amino acids called? It's a poly-something. It's a polypeptide, okay? Polypeptide. The number of blanks there were kind of a hint as to what the word was. All right, 8, why are there so many different shapes of proteins? So there's 20 amino acids. How do we get millions of proteins out of that? Well, depending on the order of the amino acids, you can get a lot of different types of proteins. So let's put many combinations of amino acids, okay? Okay, so just because there's 20 doesn't mean there's only 20 proteins. Those 20 amino acids can come together in a lot of different combinations, and each of those different combinations of amino acids is going to yield a different protein. So that's how we get millions of proteins out of only 20 amino acids. Okay, 9, what type of catalyst is made of proteins? What type of catalyst is made of proteins? So this is called an enzyme, okay? And I just mentioned it today, but we're going to talk about it in a lot more detail next unit. Okay, enzymes are very, very important. Basically what they do is there are millions of chemical reactions happening in your body at any moment. Like any type of digestion is going to be a type of chemical reaction? Well, enzymes are proteins that make those chemical reactions happen faster. And that's what a catalyst is. It's something that makes something happen. So enzymes are proteins, and they make chemical reactions happen a lot faster. Okay, great. So let's look at 10. Blank are made of proteins and help fight diseases. Okay, any ideas for this one? So this is going to be an antibody. Okay, think of like white blood cells. Okay, white blood cells help keep you from getting sick. They fight off bacteria and foreign invaders. They keep you well. So that's a type of protein, and we call those proteins antibodies, all right? 11, blank are made of proteins and help you feel emotions. Okay, what makes you feel emotions? And they're very strong when you're like going through puberty. Any ideas on that? Yeah, this is going to be a hormone. Okay, some hormones are made out of proteins, some are made out of lipids, but a lot of them are made out of proteins. All right, and then 12, which picture below represents a protein? Okay, this one's kind of tricky. It's going to be this one here kind of in the middle, and just to kind of give you a brief overview of how I knew that, this is a lipid, so it's not that one. You can see how it's kind of got this crooked angle to it. That's an unsaturated lipid, so that's how I knew that wasn't the answer. This right here is a, let me draw an X over it, sorry. This is a nucleic acid. I see a sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogen base, so that's how I knew that one wasn't going to be a protein. That's a nucleic acid. But this one over on the far right, you should actually know because we talked about this one last time. This is a polysaccharide. Remember that sugars are often depicted as little rings, and so I see a lot of rings here, and so this one is actually a polysaccharide. So the only option that I really had left was this one right here in the middle. So I hope that was helpful. Your teacher has some other assignments for you to work on today to practice this stuff. So make sure to give it your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.